Okay.
So we're going to stand up here with the cat.
With the cat, just so we can see you and you can see us. It's a dangerous. We hope the cat doesn't move. Or scratch.
Or scratch, or spike.
Scratch.
Or spike. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We thought we'd spend the next 30 minutes or so in conversation with William about the exhibition and about the production that some of the work in the exhibition is related to, the great yes and the great no. I have a few questions to get us going. We've got some video to share, possibly some extracts of text from the work that is in progress. And then we'll open it up to you for questions.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Great.
That's fine.
Cool. So I thought a first question to ask would be about the green paper. What is the story of the green paper, William?
Funny you should ask. So the green, for every project to happen, there always has to be a meeting of two things. There has to be a question outside of the studio that comes into the studio, whether it's a question of history, of literature, of whatever the theme is, something that's not from the studio, and it has to meet some medium in the studio through which that question can be addressed. And one of the interior logics was the logic of the green paper, and then the second is the story of migration, exile, and negritude from our production of the great yes, the great no. So Mwenya is part of the team that is working with me on a new theatre project which will be ready in July next year, due to be ready July next year. We're working on the script, constructing the script together, so we can get onto that also. Yeah. But maybe to explain, the green came out of a previous project. A previous project was a film to accompany a Shostakovich symphony. And well, maybe we show the first video. I don't know if people can see it. Most people can see it, I hope. Okay. What is all this green? What does it all mean? This isn't green. This is invisibility. We film ourselves on the green, and then we subtract the green, we cut it out, and then we can be anywhere, like in a quarry, or an execution site, or in an old Soviet museum full of all the historical exhibits, or in a municipal swimming pool. Is this a way to proceed? To what end? Well, eventually to find where we are, but at the moment, just to say we're inside a film for a Shostakovich symphony. The symphony that was first performed just after Stalin's death, so we can explore that whole history through it. I mean, you won't let this era pass you by. Or, yeah, in a theater, an adjunct to the Soviet Museum. Well, I suppose at least we can escape the studio for a moment. Or not. I mean, I'm starting to feel nauseous. We hope to find a way of constructing a cardboard history, a collage of different impulses of the skills, taking all the fragments, the whims, the energy of everybody in the studio and seeing if we can bring together some sense of history as a construction, as something that we make and understand, rather than just discover. So the green comes out of this filming technique of filming people against a green screen and then being able to place them anywhere. But in the studio, we'd painted the studio green. And while working on the film, two things. One, there was something about the images of the figures against the green that felt very strong. And we wanted to continue to turn that into a live performance. And so the green, we thought, could act almost as a backdrop for the performance. And in the performance, I thought there would be one sequence, which you saw in the workshop, of an actual theatrical painting, scenic painting on green paper or green cloth. So maybe if we show the next short clip, this short clip, you'll get a sense of the scale that was going to be, or that was painted and drawn on it. It was done quickly, not as quickly as this, but it is the arc, it was kind of a sense of a light work. So there's something about what the paper is when it's got the green paint on it. It's white paper painted green. But the acrylic surface holds the ink and the charcoal in a slightly different way to plain paper. So it also had to do with learning the grammar of drawing and painting on that paper. So hence the green, yeah.
Great.
And out of that jungle drawing, of course, these ones came. Not literally from that drawing, but from that process.
Maybe to pick up on this, on what you just said about different grammars, one of the most interesting things about working with William on The Great Yes, The Great No is that it doesn't feel like there's a hierarchy of materials in the room. I mean, as you can see in this exhibition, we've got drawings, we've got sculptures. Some of the sculptures started as torn paper works. And in the workshop space for The Great Yes, The Great No, the text, the bodies, the still images, the moving images, the chorus all feel like they have the same weight, as it were, the same responsibility for making meaning somehow.
So it's to explain the workshop process, is always a coming together, as I said, of things from inside the studio, in this case, showing in detail how the green paper becomes one of the languages. But the same thing is done with text, as Mwenya said, of literally found fragments of text from many different sources. Mwenya specifically really looking at writers from Martinique living in France in the 1920s that we'll talk about more. So the pieces of text are there as raw material to play with. We work with a group of 7 women singers and a composer, and the music and the lines and how the chorus sings expands also in the workshop. A workshop is maybe a grouping of 40 people in my studio over 10 days. At the end of 10 days, we hope we know a lot more about the production than at the beginning, both in terms of scenes, in terms of image, in terms of music, in terms of text. So at the end of the second workshop, which is where we are now, we have a pretty clear sense of the whole shaping of the piece. So there's a sense of a dispersed authorship also. The composer is vital in it. Mwenya is vital in it. The design, the costume designer, the set designer, the video editors, all are inventing as we go rather than simply carrying out instructions. And I think that's important in understanding both how the drawings work, but in a way, drawings are the model of how the production works. And in an extended way, the drawings and the production are an attempt to say, is this actually how we can make sense of the world outside of the studio or the theater? In other words, is the form of collage, of fragmentation and constructing a provisional sense out of different fragments one puts together, a way of both describing how we make sense of the world outside and a way of maybe thinking about it. That's the long-term question in the studio. Is this, the studio is always a very stupid place, and the workshop of necessity has to have a big space for stupidity, for not knowing why we're doing something, but testing it out and seeing what it could mean.
I'm going to ask you at some point about what some of your other guiding questions are, but first, so part of the kind of invention process, I suppose, of the workshop room is that everybody goes off and makes material, brings it back to the workshop, the workshop group, and it feels like your role is a curatorial one more than a directorial one, as in it feels like a different kind of role where in a kind of more classical theatre making way of working, perhaps, where we're serving a playwright's text. This is not that at all.
No, I think that feels
quite different.
I think, I'd not thought of it as curatorial.
Okay.
But I think what is important is the openness quite far down the process. Yeah. When I first started working in larger scale productions, in larger opera or theatre productions, where there was going to be a big number of people, and I started working with people helping with the set design or the costume design. When I was looking for people, there were some people I interviewed who had very certain ideas. I'd say, what sort of set do you think we could use for this? And they'd come with beautiful renderings and drawings and models. And I realized I was completely kind of terrified of that certainty. But I thought I'd better follow it because they know what they're doing and I don't really know what I'm doing. And then I eventually found designers who said, well, I haven't come with a design. I don't know what it will be. And I thought, that's fantastic. Now we can work. Where the process of making the piece is discovering what the piece is, that it's not made in theory in advance and then carried out. So both with the text that Mwenya's finding and bringing to the libretto as we go, to the construction of scenes, to which ones work, which ones don't work. So for example, that painting you saw, the very quick painting, the time-lapse painting of the large backdrop, this was something we thought we would have on the stage, and there'd be a section of it. We'd work with projections, but one section we'd have an actual scenic painting and the performers in front of it.
It feels like you are, the chance is a big feature of how you work, and I wanted to kind of link it to the sculptures back here and the torn paper and the kind of chance encounter of what happens when you've got different pieces of torn paper together.
I would say it's not. I mean, chance for me is a different category. So the Surrealists in this piece, the historical background to the piece of theatre, which also becomes the background to the portraits in the room and to the texts on the landscapes, on the jungles, is of a journey from Marseille to Martinique in 1941. So the Germans have invaded France. There's a neo-Nazi Vichy government in France, and many people tried to flee France: Jews, communists, Surrealists, homosexuals, everybody who was under threat from the Nazi government. And they fled in this boat to Martinique, this tiny island in the Caribbean. So that became kind of the starting point of the piece. And the Surrealists, that's also very much about movement from a rationalist European view to the much more organic, uncertain terrain of the Surrealists and the way that poets in Martinique were writing. So the Surrealists believed a lot in chance. You would simply dip something in and out of a hat and make your text out of whatever sentences you found. So it's not quite that. It's a sense of gathering a lot of fragments of text, of lines, from many different sources, many different poets, Aeschylus, from Greek tragedy to Russian poets to the Caribbean poets, and then gathering, say, making a selection of 150 of those lines from a notebook in which had been written, and then not pulling them out by chance and saying, okay, these are the lines we're doing as it's done that way, but saying, let's spread them on the table and then, without knowing quite what the themes are, start gathering them and seeing what they suggest. So it's neither programmed, nor is it chance. It's somewhere in between where you rely on some unconscious or some half-felt intelligence that's going to gather them together. I mean, there are parts of maybe it's interesting, the voice of the oracle. So there's a surrealist game. I mean, there were many different surrealist games, ways of making images that the surrealists used in the 1930s and 40s. One of which was still a children's game now, party game now. Someone draws the head, and then you fold your piece of paper, and someone draws the body, and you fold that, and someone draws the legs, without seeing the other two, and you open it up, and you get your strange creature. We call it the exquisite corpse, but in fact in French, l'exquisite, le corps exquisite is just the exquisite body. But it's, so that's something we do use in the production, idea of different, which again has to do with the collage, a sense of making sense from fragments. You put different surprising fragments together and seeing what they become. But this was a game that Aimé Césaire, the great poet from Martinique, whose famous poem, a notebook of a return to my native land, Cahiers d'un retour au pays natal, played with his wife, Suzanne Césaire, who was one of the founders of the Negritude movement in Paris in the 1930s, a group of, well, you'll talk about the Negritude movement and the participants, the key participants that become characters in our theatre production. But this was an exercise they played where they would write a question, fold it over and write an answer, not knowing what the question had been, and then the next question and the next answer. So this is from what they've done. Do you want to do the questions and I'll do the answers?
Sure.
Okay.
So we're not sure yet where this is going to feature in the work.
Well,
this particular section.
We don't know where it fits, but we know it's going to be there. And it's also for a piece of music for a cello that asks the question, and a drum that answers the question, and a movement of someone like a kind of body sign language of these questions. So it's, yeah, it gives you a good sense of how at the edge of meaning these hover. You want them to mean something, and they almost do, so there's that push towards coherence.
What is night?
It is eternally breaking the same heart.
What is hating?
Hiding behind one's face very far away.
What is poetry?
It is the bell tolled by the sky's great wind.
What is being in despair?
It is getting out of a masterful mess.
What do you desire?
It is to hear the romance of romance.
What is death?
Traveling across the world with closed eyes.
What is a dream?
A great flash of light right in the heart.
What is desire?
An exciting catastrophe.
What am I?
Scrupulously separating day from night.
What is loving?
Being able to sleep peacefully.
What then is thought?
Walking dangerously on tiptoe on the line of fire.
What is boredom?
It is the dreadful sea monster.
What is speaking?
It is to fly off swiftly into the great fog.
What is harmony?
It is that which sees the eye.
What is a child?
It is movement.
What is life?
It is the desire that eats the world. And then it says afterwards, etc., 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 etc. So that becomes a piece of raw material. So that becomes raw material to use in the piece. There's a tiny fragment of it in this section we'll show afterwards. And it really also came out of a combination of movements one of the dancers was making to these phrases. So instead of just doing a sign language in your hands, it would be a whole body movement that would end somewhere at the question or the answer. And we're trying to see, we'll find a place for it. We tried writing our own answers and questions.
They weren't as good.
And I'm not sure how much this was literally just the questions and answers folded over and how much there was a judicious editing before they were published in one of the magazines, but it's kind of wonderful. Yeah.
So one of my roles as the dramaturg is to find, select, extract pieces of text, and then decide with William and with Jessica and the team that's working on the libretto, how that text will be used, what will be sung, what will be spoken, what will be translated, and is it translated into movement, as William is talking about? Is it translated into text that becomes part of the video projection? So there's this, this kind of non-hierarchy in terms of text feels like a really interesting way to work with text, right? That we're not, as I said, serving a kind of initial script, but it really becomes as malleable and playful as all of the other things in the room.
I mean, the way that libretto works, it started with this collection of lines, and then it expanded. We found more suddenly we had like 50 pages of script, which was much too long. So then it was quite radically shortened, lines taken out. And then great new lines were discovered, and so it expanded again, and those are being cut down. And it's gradually finding its shape that will be done. In terms of the speaking or singing, there's some lines of the poet Aimé Césaire, played by an actor who's also a great dancer and a great singer. And he started off speaking the lines, but halfway through, it kind of burst into song. And gradually understood, no, that character is going to be primarily a sung character, the character of Aimé Césaire, and the character of Suzanne, his wife, is primarily a spoken text. But sometimes lines are taken from one character given to another. So the lines on these landscapes, and the landscapes in a way represent Martinique. Martinique, not a literal Martinique, they're kind of a Martinique of the imagination. What is the other from the mechanized death of Europe at that time into an image of a different world? So there's a kind of utopian element to them, but the phrases come from the chorus and from many other sources and are kind of a damaged utopia.
Should we show the extract of the...
We can show the extract. So this is not just to give you, this is a 5-minute extract from the workshop in the in the backstage of a theatre. And it's edited in this form to show to theatres to try to persuade them to present the show. So there's both explanation and pieces in it. But yeah. We're on board a ship, the Captain Paul Lemerle from Marseille, bound for Martinique, June 1941. Refugees escaping from Vichy, France. Surrealists, communists, André Breton, Claude Lévi-Strauss, the anthropologist. And on board the ship also is the captain, who in fact is Karen, the ferryman of the dead, who not only are transporting these people across the Atlantic, but is able to call up historical characters from the past, and even some from the future, to reflect on the shift between Europe and its colonial past.
Well, on the day I was born, God was sick and could only pick at his food. But with a little schnapps, you can forget the world.
He calls up the great Martinican poets and philosophers, Aimé Césaire, Suzanne Césaire. He calls up the philosopher and psychoanalyst Frantz Fanon, the Nadal sisters. Even calls up Josephine Bonaparte, Napoleon's wife, who came from this tiny island of Martinique. We have a duet of Josephine Bonaparte and Josephine Baker, another transatlantic voyager.
Hold on to your hats. There's a new wind blowing now. 2, 4.
I feel ridiculous in their shoes, in their tuxedo, in their dress shirts, in their colors, in their monocles, in their bowler hats.
We're looking at the shift between a rationalist view of the world and the openness that the surrealists suggest and bring, and that is there in the poetry that comes from Martinique, of a different world to be made.
La vraie poésie est ailleurs, loin des rimes, des complins, des alizés, des perroquets. Notre poésie sera cannibale ou ne sera pas. Essayez de vous mettre dans notre rythme.
The boat is filled also with the music of a chorus of women, with the ship's band, which plays a range of music from cafe music to Martinican bijines, a dance form not dissimilar to dance forms and music from Southern Africa, where the whole cast and production is made.
At the end of the day, they saw little wind. Citizen, what have they done with all the air? Miscarried dreams and nowhere to put them. Air stagnant, unbroken brightness of a single page. I'm the worst of all my brothers, and yet I'm the one who weeps at night.
We use the ship of fools, as a way to allow all questions to bubble and find potential answers.
Right. The masks. We haven't spoken about the masks.
Okay, so in the film that preceded this and in this, the technique we use for showing characters are these flat cardboard masks that actors really hold in their hands. When they sing, they can take the masks off, sort of like a, and you sing and you put your mask back. And so we're testing the flexibility. How necessary do we have to have the mask the whole time? How much do you just see it once and then you see the performer behind it? But it also gives for a kind of a fluidity of identity that a man can swap with a woman's mask that I can never quite work out. It's a man holding, a male actor holding a woman's mask, and then they swap. And there's a kind of looseness, almost like a physical acting on stage of the exquisite corpse, of a head changing and the body staying the same. We haven't worked out how to swap legs yet, but we'll get there. And so the masks become the main characters. Well, the masks designate the main characters, which are André Breton and his twin, André Breton, a bit like Thompson and Thompson in the Tintin books. To go through the Césaires, Amy and Suzanne Césaire. Damas, the poet, Léon Damas, the poet from Martinique also, whose poetry is not as great as Césaire's poetry, but it's more performable as theater. So he has several fragments that are in the text, and then other characters that are almost passengers on the boat. We see Lennon going past, we'll see Fanon, we'll see many different characters that go through. So the exhibition here is a kind of, it's not a residue because a lot of it is made parallel to the production rather than what's left. What I wanted to say about that big green drawing, which was kind of the size of the wall at the back there, it was made and we used it for a day, and at the end of the day we said, you know what, it's not good, it's not going to work. So in fact that drawing is scrapped, it's not in the production, all that remains of that big backdrop drawing in fact are these drawings, which weren't that drawing, but come out of that experience of doing the large-scale, quick landscape jungle drawing. I mean, most of the drawings, in fact, are based on collages of photographs taken in our garden. So the garden is lush, it's not as densely lush as these. So they're fragments of a tree here, a bush here, a palm over there that are put together to give the reference for these drawings.
Can we take some questions?
Sure.
Any questions or comments from the house?
Yeah. Maybe talk a little bit about the women, about Suzanne and the Nadal sisters.
Sure.
Just to give the...
While you're thinking about the questions, yes. Sure, so a lot of my kind of research and reading for text extracts is around the negritude movement. And in particular looking at the prominent women at that time. So negritude was a kind of cultural, intellectual, revolutionary movement that started in kind of 1920s, 30s, 40s, and has become known by three male figureheads. But as we know, when that is the case, there are often an equal number, if not more, women who are equally prominent, but just not as well known. And this is the case for the negritude movement. So we're looking at Suzanne Césaire, Aimé Césaire's wife, and the Nadal sisters, two out of 7 sisters, who were also born in Martinique and were among a few very smart Martinicans at the time to study in Paris. And they started a salon in Paris with the other great black minds at the time, and published some interesting revolutionary texts. And so they, for us, have really become quite central as figures in this, on this boat journey.
So it goes both ways. It goes that Mwenya introduced us to many of these essays and texts by the different women, and we decided we needed one French-speaking actor in the production. Seeing all their texts are originally written in French. A lot of them we've translated. So we're the first translator of Saverio into isiZulu, into Siswati, into Xhosa, the mother tongues of all the people who sing or perform it. So it's in many different languages, but we wanted to have the sound of the French as well. So we've auditioned by long distance, by Zoom, different actors in France and Belgium, and found a very good actress whose family is from Rwanda, but she's lived home almost all her life in Belgium. And when she came to the workshop in Johannesburg, the first time we'd met her, we suddenly realized, oh, the strength of her performance. And so through her strength, the character of Suzanne on the boat has expanded and in fact becomes a central figure that moves all the way through the boat. So it was both a kind of a wish on Mwenya's part to say, these are voices which are suppressed, which we need to hear, and then finding the actual language or the means to do it through the performance of Nancy. So it kind of, it shifts. As I was saying, the voice of Césaire becomes a sung voice, not out of principle, not saying Césaire's poetry needs to be sung, although many people say that's the great thing. It is like a singing in the cadence of the lines, but also because of the performer that we had. So it's partly chance,
Sure.
but it's also partly something in our choice of her when we were doing the auditions to say there's something in her that feels like it's going to be special. Well, I've never actually asked Mwenya how well you sleep and when you're awake in the middle of the night. I know I'm very often awake from sort of 4 till 5:30 in the morning. Then at 5:30 I say to Anne, my wife, I mean, I can feel myself going back to sleep. I say, now I'm off to the movies. Because the dreams you have in that last hour and a half of sleep are the ones you wake up remembering that feel so vivid. But I don't know in your case.
Was that a question directed
Yeah.
to me? Oh,
Yes.
wow. Okay. Or for both of us, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about my sleep patterns at the moment.
Okay.
I kind of wait for the house to be quiet. We have two small children, and so there's a kind of the lull of post kind of 8:30 into the night is generally when I feel tired enough for the thoughts to settle. And I think that might be my most creative time, actually. It's a bit less frantic. And I mean, I do think that there's something about, just to kind of connect to the great yes, the great no, something about the cardboard masks that does allow us to play in that ghost realm, you know, for these kind of spirit figures, if you will, of this time, of the various revolutions that they represent, to appear and disappear and to be, you know, kind of these headless, heady figures for us.
Yeah. I mean, because this is dealing with surrealism and dreams, there was something I allowed myself to do that I've not. I woke up one morning with a dream, and I thought, okay, let's see what happens if we make this dream literally. The image that was in the dream of a kind of box with divisions and birds inside the box and singing. So we did a very simple animation of that, cut up birds. And then we said, well, let's just test it with some of the songs that the chorus has already been improvised and have made. Not done specially for it. And we found a song that suddenly matched the, unfortunately, I don't have it on the clips we have here, that kind of worked together. So that, but as you know, there's generally, however fascinating your dream is to yourself, there's usually nothing more boring than somebody had this amazing dream last night. Let me tell you about it. You know, at first there were the ants, and then the ants turned into, I was going through the door, you know, the kind of door you can't open the handle and the stairs are too narrow. And you say, God, spare me. Yes, I know it all. So I'm wary of the literal dreams coming in, but certainly we gave it the benefit of the doubt, and it may well still stay. It's an interlude, a minute, a tiny, but that's also because the singers sing such fabulous bird music. So they may well be there. The deeper question of how do ancestors come through, I'm a kind of a rationalist skeptic, but nonetheless there are many things that come that we don't anticipate. That I say, for me it would be kind of unconscious rather than literally the ancestors, but for many of the performers it's very present. Their ancestors are there in the room with them, and there are times when the music has to stop because people are kind of overcome by that presence with them, and people run out of the room and I say, what's going on? What's going on? They say, no, we need to, don't worry. Not your stuff. We'll sort it out. Yes. There was another question.
Couple questions.
Yes, I've kind of used to use the term fortuna, like good fortune, rather than chance and
Intuition.
yeah, it is kind of an intuition. What it primarily is, it's privileging the category of recognizing over knowing. So as something appears, you recognize and it feels right, it feels familiar, and you follow that rather than knowing it in advance. I mean, you can very simply see it with pieces of, like children's game of fuzzy felt, where you put different felt shapes together and they suddenly make a house, or torn pieces. You know, these sculptures over here started off with kind of offcuts of colored paper that I'd been using for some of the masks, and then just arranged them on the table, and suddenly they felt, oh, it's halfway like a figure or a plant. And so it's not random chance, and it's a kind of pushed intuition. But yes, that's kind of the things that we don't know that we know, but that we know, or that we recognize. Yes, there's a question here. So we arrive at the still point two ways. One is by saying to you, come and see it twice. The other is saying, kind of relax into it, and you'll see, sometimes your eye will be following the video, sometimes you'll be following the actors, you'll read, and not to be panic-struck if I missed that bit because I was watching that bit, to say that you are, in a way, constructing a provisional coherence of the piece from different fragments. But having said that, there's definitely a time when we say, okay, this is just too busy. We can't know what we're watching. So it is shaped, the dosages. How much of this loud percussion can we take? How much can the whole background move before everybody in the audience reaches for an air sickness bag? And there's a big difference. Some people get nauseous at the slightest movement, and some people say, no, bring it on. The stormier the movements, the better. So it's and that will kind of be adjusted almost till the first performance throughout the whole process. It's a bit like the drawings. You pin all the texts on them, and there are a lot more at some stage, and some get taken right off, and some get put back on. And the same with the text that we're writing in the piece. What feels too much, what feels too dense. And then in performance, as we rehearse it, you think, oh God, this is a whole long monologue, and then you see it being performed, you think, okay, no, this could continue. It doesn't have to end right here.
There was another question. Maybe
Take the last question.
Great. Go ahead.
I don't know. I will try to give you an intelligent interpretation, but it's like a viewer looking at it. I think what it was primarily was a sense of a scanning of a landscape. You know, a lot of digital material now needs, if you're following the movement of a body, you put little dots on them and then you can track them. So it's tracking, their points of tracking, but also points where they used to write figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, little commentary on the image behind it, explaining in detail. So the text in those are saying, yes, there's a landscape, and then there's a layer on top of it.
There was another question. Go.
With this project, I've known that I wanted to work with a chorus of women singers. So the chorus, a lot of the chorus texts I'd already kind of arrived at. I thought we would have a figure of death, which became the figure of care on the ferryman of the dead, who then becomes the captain of the ship. So I had those things, and we had 40 people coming for a workshop. And I thought, this isn't enough, this isn't enough. We're going to arrive, and they say, well, what are we doing? And I said, well, we've got the chorus, and we've got this character. And then, so as it was getting, I was getting more and more anxious about what is the material we're doing. And then I came across an article by my friend Arisitas about this journey on the ship. And in fact, I realized I'd read an early draft of that many years ago. And from that had been prompted to read Césaire, but I'd forgotten about it. And then when I came, it suddenly found, yes, the chorus are passengers on the ship. Care, and the text I'd written there becomes the captain. We now have a whole, and so sort of reading that article after the first 3 paragraphs, it was, okay, I know what we're doing. Okay, it's done, the piece is made. that sense. And then, of course, it's not. But it was that. And that was just a few weeks before the big workshop happened. So sometimes the theme comes early. But in this case, the title was there years ago. Which is from a poem by Kavafi. And the whole way through in the workshop, we're trying to work out what is our great yes, what is our great no, which we finally find in the last chorus of the performers. I think a range of people. I mean, we don't think, what is our audience? We think, is this of interest to us? And we hope that if it's of interest to us, there will be other people for whom it will be of interest. But we know that we start performing it in the south of France, not in Marseille, but in Arles, slightly along the coast. And that's both because we like to be set in France, it starts in France and it goes across, but also because there's an institution there that is giving very generous support to making the piece possible. We know it's always difficult, but our aim, and we have done it always, is to bring the production like this back to Johannesburg. If there's funding, also to Cape Town. So it has a local audience which will be different. I've given up trying to predict what audiences understand or don't understand. I've given up trying to understand on behalf of an audience. Audiences are always, an intelligent 9-year-old often gets much more out of a project than someone who's busy doing their PhD, who's reading it in a very narrow, specific way. So, when we did The Head and the Load, which is about the First World War in Africa, it was performed in Britain and France and others, and we eventually were able to do it in Johannesburg, where it had a very definite and different response, but it wasn't like it wasn't able to find a response overseas. In Johannesburg, it had a different response because a lot of the languages that people just had to read in translation, people were understanding directly. So it had an immediacy of engagement. So there'll be large chunks of this that, there's going to be no one overseas that will understand the isiSotho, the Xhosa, the Siswati, all together, plus the French and the English. And there's no one in the cast who understands all the text untranslated.
Great.
Good.
Thank you.